You'll have the chance to ask questions of Nikki Sinclaire. Nikki is, of course, a West Midlands MEP, and Nikki's book, Never Give Up, is out now. And I've been reading it. In fact, I got up at 4:30 this morning to make sure I read it before this interview. And I have to say, it's a cracking read. Nikki, very good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. Good, thank you.
You're right. And Nikki, I suppose the most newsworthy aspect of the book, and that which has been picked up, is that about your gender reassignment, sex change, call it what you will. Reading through the book, though, one of the things that really struck me was that a sense of outsiderness that you've had all through your life, both pre and post-op, if you like, growing up always in a sense feeling a little bit detached from others around you. Is that a fair observation?
To a certain extent. Obviously, childhood, that was the case. Obviously, knowing there was something drastically wrong with you from the age of 3 and not being able to talk to anybody about it. So always feeling on the outside. It isn't my quote, but a quote from someone else, Caroline Cossey, said, "Life was a game I couldn't learn to play." And when I read that about 25 years ago, that seemed to suit my life. Obviously, in politics, I've been a bit more of an outsider. I think in life in general, I don't feel like an outsider now, to be honest, so I don't agree with that. But in politics, I'm an outsider, probably because I'm outspoken and I stand up for my beliefs, so therefore I don't fit neatly into any political party.
Well, indeed, and it was that which I know led to the disagreement that led to you leaving UKIP, and we'll talk about that in some detail in a little while. The sense of alienation that you had as a child, though, was about this belief that you had, you say, from the age of 3, that really you were a girl trapped in a boy's body at that time.
Yeah, at 3, obviously, you don't really understand that. I just didn't think that, have that thought process, but I knew there was something drastically wrong with me. But I couldn't articulate it. I couldn't find the words. I knew I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Strangely, instinctively, I knew that. It was also wrapped up in the Catholicism that I grew up with, and that was obviously difficult. There was praying, thinking that would sort it out, and it didn't. So yes, it was just a very, obviously, difficult childhood.
And for your dad, and your dad features very prominently in the early part of the book. You know, your dad, sort of a burly van driver, and you talked about sitting on his seat, you know, having your jam sandwiches as he went about London, where you grew up, and all that sort of stuff. And you were, as a child, sort of a mini-me to your dad, weren't you?
Absolutely, yes. I was the eldest of 4, and to kind of get me out of my mum's feet, he would take me out on the lorry. He was a HGV driver, and as you say, around London, which was fantastic for me to see all these fantastic sights. And yes, it was a unique experience. But again,
and not somebody, in fairness, obviously a very, loving, warm, generous man, and know it's that comes over through the book. But not a man who understood alternative lifestyles. Gay would not even have figured on his radar. Never mind having to have a sex change. And you talk about the time when he smashed up your Dansette record player.
Because he didn't want to waste electricity, and I found it on a skip. So he thought that was dangerous. It probably was, but but I think that there was a very normal kind of father-child relationship. That you have many teenagers falling out with their parents, and there was a big issue with my father throughout my childhood was about getting my hair cut, which I wanted to keep my hair long for obvious reasons, and he wanted me to have a short back and sides.
Yeah,
that was our biggest dispute.
And you talk, about I think you're about 14, aren't you, where you start being bold enough to go out to nightclubs in London. Obviously, you're very tall, so you're able to pass for 18, going to nightclubs on the sort of new romantic scene, places like Blitz. Yeah. And at that age, you'd bought a dress, which you tucked into your bag, and then on the train up into London, you would change and you would go out dressed up as a woman.
Yeah, it was a bit able to release who I was, and it wasn't one thing I really want to make clear about. This isn't nothing about the clothes. I mean, a lot of that time also I talk about the book. It was just like scruffing up my hair and wearing a curtain. Though, if people remember New Romantic thing, it was about any materials put together and belted up. I mean, so it wasn't necessarily female clothes. It was just about being myself, having a release from what I thought the straitjacket of my life.
But you did, that at the same time there was a whole issue around makeup as well and so on. And this was a side of your life that you had to hide from your family.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was, a big internal conflict that you were going through, but also something that you sensed. You mentioned the Catholic background. There was talk of you being a priest at one time, and you couldn't really share any of this life with your family.
No, I instinctively knew that you couldn't. And there was one experience I saw in the news of the world. James Bond gal was a boy, and I said to my dad, "Oh, look at this, Dad." And my dad's reaction was incredibly negative, as it would be, because, the attitudes weren't so enlightened in those times. And, so on one hand, it was good that there was someone else like me, which was the first time I'd realised there was someone else like me. And two, the negative side of it, of my dad's reaction, which was a confirmation that I couldn't speak to him or my mum or anybody else about it.
Yeah, you're right about, I think it was 1981, opening a copy of the News of the World. And because you were obviously conflicted, didn't feel that you were entirely at ease within your own skin. You said that was the moment when, for the first time, the penny dropped that you were a woman trapped inside a man's body.
Well, no, I kind of slightly felt that was an understanding of wow, I'm not the only one, that there was others. But I think I obviously knew that from a much earlier age. I think, I began to realise that as I was growing up. I think by the age of 11, I fully understood the problem I was in. I just didn't know the words. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know what could happen. I was still praying. I mean, I was quite a devout, and I'm still a Catholic. I'm not a lapsed Catholic. I am a Catholic, but I was very devout Catholic as a child, and I seriously believed that somehow God was going to sort this out. Yeah.
So you consciously then, I mean, in your own mind, you articulated this sense that I am a woman. I'm just or I am a girl, but I'm in a boy's body. You understood that much, but because it was nowhere reflected anywhere else, you didn't feel that you could say it or even understand it.
Exactly. Yeah, as I said, it's like a straitjacket.
And from 1981 then, how did that one article in the News of the World change your life?
Well, I don't know if it changed my life. I said it had positive and negative connotations, because it had all the bigotry that came with it, the sensationalist headlines and my father's reaction and so forth. So it had a lot of negative. So it actually probably, even though it had the positive thing of me knowing there was others, it also put me in reverse all the negative about it, saying this was wrong. But obviously I couldn't escape what I was feeling inside.
Yeah.
And through those ages I was, pretty much, self-taught. I couldn't fit in at school. I wouldn't go to school. I would go to libraries and teach myself. I would go to museums in London. It's probably why I'm so good at history, because, that's the area that I really concentrated in. And so then I was able to educate myself and find books on sociology that talked a bit about mainly homosexuality to begin with, because that's the thing that it was all wrapped up in mistakenly, because it has nothing to do with sexuality, and that's the mistake that people make. It's a medical condition.
Gender dysmorphia.
It's called gender dysphoria.
Dysphoria, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a horrible condition. You've probably never ever questioned, Adrian, your gender in your life at all. Why would you? 98% of people probably wouldn't. But for those that do, it's an absolutely terrible thing. And there's been medical research done on male to female transsexuals after they've died. They've obviously had autopsies, and the brains have been found to be similar to that of females. So, it's not something that you choose to do. Why would you choose to do this? Why would you wouldn't. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. So and you've got to deal with this medical condition. Of course, the medical profession or society wasn't, in the 70s and 80s, wasn't very ready or enlightened. No,
well, I mean, again, you write in the book about how in the 80s, you went to sort of support groups for gay people because, you thought you were a male homosexual at that time. Yeah. You went to your own GP.
Yeah. That was awful. That was absolutely awful. To be told to go away and grow up. I had to wait all these years. So knowing from the age of 3, wait until when I was 16, so I knew they couldn't tell my parents, to actually going in there and then being told to go away and grow up. And, if you don't sort this out, you'll end up in London as a drug addict and a prostitute. You said it to a 16-year-old. And it wasn't like, if you come back in 3 weeks or 2 months and come back and talk to me. It was like, just go away and grow up and don't forget about this. I mean, it's awful. And then finding the number of the hospital in London, Charing Cross, and then phoning up and then being told, sorry, we can't see you to 21. At 16, 21's a life sentence. It's forever.
You talked in the book about your despair when you walked back to the bus stop having had that meeting with the GP. How did it feel?
How do you think? It was the most awful feeling in the world.
And still affect you now to talk about it?
I think, writing the book, this isn't something that dominates my life now, but obviously writing the book, it's brought up some raw pain I hadn't felt for 20, 30 years. All of a sudden you're transported back to that painful times that I've thankfully left behind. But yeah, it's very painful because it was incredibly painful at the time to actually live a life day to day with this pain that you can't really talk to people about. And when you do trust people and you have that negative reaction, absolutely horrible.
You have moved on in your life. Do you think society has moved on?
Absolutely. Definitely. I think I commissioned this YouGov poll, which is in the book, and it said that I basically asked the question: if you were going to vote for someone and you learnt that they had a gender reassignment sex change, would it change your voting patterns? And 66% of people nationally said it would make no difference to them whatsoever. A couple of percent actually said they're more likely to vote. But quite happily, in the Midlands, that figure was actually 70% that said it would make no difference. So we must be the most tolerant place in the country.
How has the reaction been now then to the news, if you like, the revelation in the book that you had a sex change? Because you had always kept that hidden and I
never discussed it.
Yeah.
Because it was a medical issue, and people don't have to disclose their medical history, and why should they? This isn't sexuality. I was quite open about being gay, lesbian. I was quite open about that because, fair enough, people want to know how you live your life. But this is a medical condition that I had dealt with many years ago, and so I suppose the question people want to know is why now. Well, first of all, the reaction has been incredibly positive, hugely positive. The reaction on Twitter and meeting people. My mobile surgery's gone out a few times and no one's said anything at all, which is good because I think actually, why should it be an issue? But I think the one question you haven't asked me yet, but I should imagine that people will want to know is why now? And there is a couple of reasons, and some of it's been in the press. There were some kind of veiled threats from former party UKIP that there was this. And what I didn't want, Adrian, is what happened to Caroline Cossey, is to be phoned by a paper, not necessarily The Sun, The Mirror or whoever, saying, we're going to run a story tomorrow saying this, what's your comment?
Caroline was the woman who,
the James Bond girl.
In 1981, you saw in the News of the World, who had a sex change and was then outed.
She was, basically the paper phoned her up one day and said, we're going to run the story. What's your comment? So, and she wrote a book afterwards, but I wanted to actually put my story there and tell the story about my life rather than someone putting their version of my life, which obviously they wouldn't even know anyway. So I think that was the main reason, but also journalists. And, I'm sorry to say, this station was one of those stations that really pushed this, and it was very disappointing last Monday after the news broke that you actually had a journalist on this station bragging, Steve Dyson bragging about how he was trying to do it and whatever, and making comments about my physical characteristics.
Because Steve had asked you, hadn't he, during an interview a while ago?
And I hadn't denied it. I just said, why is it important? I hadn't denied it. I just said, why is it important? But for him to come on this station the day after bragging about how he always knew and how he was asking the questions and talking about physical characteristics, that's, I think he's back in the 1980s. Someone's just woke him up from a very long sleep. Maybe we should send him back there. That TARDIS you have out there, send him back to the 1980s where he belongs.
Nikki, we'll chat to you more in a moment. 10:30, Nikki Sinclaire, West Midlands MEP, chatting to us this morning at length, deservedly at length, because her autobiography, Never Give Up, is out now. Nikki reveals in that book the truth of her sex change operation, talks about her controversial departure from UKIP as well, and has got quite a lot of other fascinating insights into life growing up as well. 08453 00 9956 if you want to have a chat with Nikki a little bit later. The time now is 10:30. Let's get the latest travel on BBC WM 95.6 with Vicky Granger.
The M6 is still slow. The southbound side, you will get caught 10 to junction 9, Wolverhampton to Wednesbury, still seeing the worst of it. And then there are a couple of chunks of roadworks as well, either side of that, so 13 to 10A and also 8 to 5, so there are speed restrictions there as well, just be warned. And Cosley, we've still got this issue on the Birmingham New Road, southbound, so from Shore Road coming down to the Ivy House lane on the A4 123. There's still a lane closed off because of a burst water main. We've got no estimate yet as to when this is going to be finished, so as you head past Cosley School, it's affecting you between Wolverhampton and Dudley. Still expect delays there. And the Small Heath Highway, still very busy around Bawdsley Circus and Sheldon's Coventry Road. It's still a struggle from the Eagle Court Business Park towards the Hobsmoat Road and the Wheatsheaf. And if you can update us, call BBC WM 95.6 Travel on 08453 00 2288.
BBC WM 10:31. Adrian Goldberg with you. We've got Nikki Sinclaire, West Midlands MEP, in the studio, talking about her life and times. Her autobiography, Never Give Up, is out now. And we're also taking your calls this morning about the loss of 400 jobs in Oldbury being exported to India by the energy company N-Power. Well, they say it will lead to greater efficiency and lower bills. Is it a reasonable trade-off, then, if you've been complaining recently about your gas and electricity bills, to send jobs abroad to India to keep your bills lower? 08453 00 9956.
The voice of Birmingham and the Black Country.
BBC WM 95.6.
Let's get the headlines. Kevin Pashby.
Good morning. N-Power have confirmed this morning that 400 jobs could go as part of plans to close one of their offices in Oldbury.
It's a shocking morning for the Black Country. It just shows how completely arrogant and insulting that they are to their customers.
That's the local Labour MP John Speller giving his instant reaction to Adrian Goldberg live on BBC WM this morning. The company wants to shut a site at Quayside House. N-Power has 3 offices in Oldbury, and jobs at another site, Birchfield House, could also go. It's part of plans to outsource 1,400 back office jobs to India. The firm says it will help keep energy bills low and improve customer service. Other news now, 6 men have been arrested as part of an investigation into an alleged football match fixing. The National Crime Agency says its focus is a suspected international illegal betting syndicate, and it's working closely with the FA and the Gambling Commission. The Daily Telegraph claims Delroy Facey, who played briefly for West Brom in 2004, is one of the men being held. The government's announced a review into plain packaging for cigarettes sold in England. It'll focus on whether such restrictions worked down under in Australia. And a Birmingham businessman will be sentenced later after being found guilty of murdering a family of 4. Taking a look at the weather, overcast today with some patchy drizzle, highs of 10 Celsius, that's 50 Fahrenheit.
The voice.
The voice. The voice of Birmingham and the Black Country. BBC WM 95.6.
It's BBC WM, 26 minutes to 11. Adrian Goldberg with you here on BBC WM, the voice of Birmingham and the Black Country. A little later, we're going to be talking to Leona Lewis, Janet Street Porter, in amongst the celebs, taking some really important calls today because 400 workers at N-Power in Oldbury in the Black Country, in all probability, are going to lose their jobs. The company says that the aim is to increase efficiency, it's to keep bills low. So I'm asking the question this morning, is it reasonable to export jobs abroad to keep your energy bills low? Do you think that the company have come under so much pressure about the high cost of gas and electricity that they are justified to export 400 jobs, back office jobs, to India? What do you reckon? Or is it time, as one or two listeners have said, to re-nationalise our power industry? 08453 00 9956. Right now we're chatting to West Midlands MEP Nikki Sinclaire. Nikki's written a pretty well publicised autobiography called Never Give Up, and I suppose understandably a lot of the newspaper publicity has focused on Nikki's decision to have a sex change operation, born a boy. She is now a woman. There's a lot of very interesting politics in this book as well, as you might expect from somebody who is now a member of the European Parliament. Nikki, you talk in your earlier life, and we're talking again about 14, 15, being an ardent Thatcherite and going out and canvassing on the streets for Maggie Thatcher.
That's earlier than that. We're talking at the age of 10, actually.
Yeah, wow, as early as that.
It was about, my political awareness came through the winter of discontent. I grew up in a council estate, very kind of rough and tough. I grew up in my early years, was in Brixton in South London. So it's very, you can imagine what type of area it was. And But we had all those strikes. You know, we were queuing up for bread, rubbish piling high on the streets. People weren't buried in Liverpool. That was on the news. Fire brigade on strike, green goddesses on the streets, ambulances. It was an absolutely terrible time. And my dad was obviously a very working class Labour voter, and he also supported the unions, the working man. And I would ask him, well, how come you got a Labour government and the unions? Why are they fighting? Can you explain? And he couldn't really adequately answer that. And then you had this very strong role model, this female, who was seemingly to me saying, look, we need to stand on our own 2 feet. We can change this. And you know, obviously with how I saw myself, I kind of related to this very strong female role model. And she also seemed to say that you can do whatever you wanted if you worked hard, which again, I knew I had to drastically change my life by the age of 10. And again, I fed into that. So yes, I actually went door knocking in the 1979 general election, unofficially, knocking and saying, "Oh, are you going to vote for Margaret Thatcher? I think you should." And I was met by a lot of laughter and some hostility. But interestingly, by 1983, that had completely changed, and pretty much a lot of them were Thatcherites. So there was she had so fundamentally changed Britain between 1979 and 93. And a lot of your listeners will have obviously very different views about Margaret Thatcher, and I can understand a lot of them. And there was definitely a north-south divide. I used to later in life travel up to Liverpool and used to see that divide.
You're a big Liverpool football fan, I know. And
absolutely.
But you blamed the devastation wrought on Liverpool on the corruption of the local Labour council.
Absolutely. I mean, and also we had the GLC in London, where they would rather spend money on posters saying like London and Liverpool's a nuclear-free city and close down OAP homes. What's most important, an OAP home or a poster saying you're a nuclear-free city, which wasn't in their power, no, because if Thatcher wanted to put a nuclear plant in the middle of London or Liverpool, she could have done.
Yeah. Do you still consider yourself a Thatcherite?
I'm not quite sure. I think I'm not quite sure what that really means anymore. I'm an admirer of her, and I got to meet her before I became an MEP, which was a fantastic experience. And I think she was an amazing woman. I think she'll be known in centuries' time, which is, I don't think many of the politicians of the last 50 years will be. And I think that she had many good values. I mean, I think those values will endure. But I think I have a more socially aware side than she did.
You talked about growing up with a very strong sense of social justice, which possibly was born out of your own personal experiences. Mm-hmm. But as you say, talking with your dad about politics, very sort of traditional working class Labour voter. How did that then lead you to UKIP?
I think the fact that I do believe, and I had this sense of history, that I'm quite a big fan of our history of our country, United Kingdom. There's many things that we've done in our history that we're probably slightly embarrassed about because we were a global power and all of that. But I think there's a lot of things to be proud about of this country. For example, off the top of my head, the most thing I think we should be proud about, the way that we stood up in 1939 to fascism. I think that was an amazing thing. And it wasn't in our economic interest to do that, but we did it because it was the right thing to do. So I'm very proud of our country, and I very have the identity of being British, and I think that the European Union and Maastricht in particular made me a citizen of the European Union without my permission, and that's what annoyed me. Who are they to change my citizenship? And that's when I became involved in Eurosceptic politics, which led on to UKIP. Because they were the only party. Of course, it was a Conservative government that actually brought us into the EU, or the Common Market as it was then known. And it was the Conservative government that made us all citizens of the European Union without asking the consent of the British people. And that's why I railed against the Conservative Party, and I joined UKIP. Hopefully that UKIP initially was going to be some type of protest that would wake the Conservative Party up. It didn't, and obviously UKIP has grown from there.
Yeah, and you were elected, of course, West Midlands MEP. Fair to say the West Midlands not an area that you knew a whole lot about before your involvement in UKIP, isn't it? I mean...
No, I didn't. No, to be fair, but obviously before I lived here for 5.5 years prior to being elected, so it wasn't I
You
didn't
lived in
come here.
Hales Owen first, didn't you, I think?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't come here to be elected. I came here to work, and it's subsequently that because I lived here, this is the area that I stood for. But I'm very proud to represent the West Midlands, and I do. You mentioned I'm a Liverpool supporter, but I'm involved, for example, in all Midlands football teams. Done a lot of work with Midlands football teams. Been obviously involved with the Coventry City thing, Worcester City, was having ground problems. So I'm very proud to be involved in jobs. I work on the employment committee in the European Parliament, and obviously jobs today is your main topic, and rightly so. But I feel really passionately about representing the 5.1 million people I do.
Why did you fall out with UKIP?
Because when I was elected to the European Parliament, they linked themselves with people that I would want nothing to do with.
People you would regard as far right.
Yeah, Holocaust deniers. Immigrants, just I have serious issues with immigration and the way that immigration is controlled in this country. I think this open door policy is absolutely atrocious. But when you actually bring that one step further, and you're sitting with people who actually hate foreigners, one person, Mario Borghezio, who has a criminal conviction in Italy, 2 of them, for assaulting migrant children. And the leader, Umberto Bossi, says he wants to shoot at the ships that are bringing them from North Africa. That's taking it a step forward. You can be critical of immigration, and I am, but to actually want to cause harm to people, that's... And then with the Holocaust denial as well, it's kind of going back to that horrible period of the 30s of blaming everyone else for our problems.
And one of the reasons why UKIP was keen to get into a sort of a wider grouping in the European Union is that if you're part of a grouping, you can then attract more funding. And
huge amounts of money.
You felt that was being pushed through by the leadership without proper discussion with the membership, and that's why you ultimately fell out with Nigel Farage.
Absolutely. What price principles? For me, I could have stayed in the Conservative Party if I wanted to be an MP. Probably with my personal life, probably the Labour Party would have probably fast-tracked me. With UKIP, all I had to do was everyone else just shut up and just went along with whatever Nigel Farage says, and I'll probably be the lead candidate next year. But my whole history has been about standing up for what I believe in, and UKIP couldn't understand that, which was for a party which was supposed to be a protest and being about your principles. They sold their principles for a very cheap price.
Nikki Sinclaire with us. Time approaching 11:15 on BBC WM. You've heard about Nikki's personal story. You've heard about Nikki's politics. If there's anything you want to ask Nikki, any sort of gaps that you feel are unfilled, any areas that you want to explore further, Nikki, West Midlands MEP, is only too happy to take your calls. Give us a bell now. 08453 00 9956, or you can text on 81333. Start your message with WM. It's approaching 11:15.
Ed Doolan on a Sunday.
This week I've got an archive interview with comedian Bill Maynard.
And as soon as they walk on the stage, they all sound exactly the same. They all say, "We love you, Miss Hannigan."
And comic legends Ken Dodd and Les Dawson.
Where do you get this coffee from? You haven't done all these yearlings, never improved. Hospitality's always at the pits.
You're still doing 5-hour shows?
4 3/4. I'm putting down. No, I look...
Join me this Sunday from 12 noon.
On BBC WM 95.6.
It's BBC WM, 11:15. Adrian Goldberg here. Nikki Sinclaire with us. Nikki is West Midlands MEP, had a sex change op, had a medical condition called gender dysphoria, which effectively means that she was a girl in a boy's body growing up. Also, as we've heard, very active in politics, an ardent Thatcherite at the time when Margaret Thatcher was at the peak of her powers, but has subsequently, after being elected as a West Midlands MEP for UKIP, has now founded her own party, We Demand a Referendum Now. And we're going to go to calls in a moment, Nick. I know 1 or 2 people want to have a chat with you. 08453 00 9956. One other question. It'd be remiss of me not to ask this question. There are allegations hanging over you, and have been hanging over you for many a long day now, about expenses. Yeah. So can you clear that up for us?
Did you feel the frustration in the book when I write about this? Because it's been 2 years, these allegations, but it relates to the time I was actually in UKIP as a UKIP MEP between 2009 and 2008. It doesn't relate to when I left UKIP, so it's only during that UKIP period. And the frustration is that I noticed something wrong in my office. There was documents missing in my office, and I reported that to the police in 2010, and they said there wasn't enough evidence, obviously made an accusation against the person. And then later that year, I discovered there was anomalies in my paperwork, and again I reported it to the police in 2010. I also referred it to OLAF, which is the EU's anti-fraud office. And they looked at it and they came back to me and said, look, there's nothing to investigate. We don't see any wrongdoing by you. So imagine my surprise a couple of years later to be arrested and to be accused of these things when I actually tried to sort them out myself a few years earlier. And here we are almost 2 years later and nothing's happening.
You haven't been charged with any offence, but you're still on police bail in relation to these.
And in the book, we can't go into detail. There's obviously legal things. In the book, it has more detail so people can read more detail in the book. Never Give Up. You can read the more detail about this. But the frustration is that I strongly deny these offences. I put, and it's audited, RSM Tenon, I actually put £30,000 a year of my salary back into my work. This year, we've for example, collected 3.5 tons of food for food banks, which has been subsidised by that. Up to now, since I was elected, nearly £150,000. If you want to make money as an MEP, and we're hugely paid, I mean, the money's huge, all you have to do is do nothing. Yeah, I'm listed as the top hardest working MEP in the West Midlands region, and I'm the most visible. I'm the only MEP in the whole country that has a mobile surgery. If I just wanted to take the money, I would just have my office in a broom cupboard and just let the money go in my bank account, because I'd be very rich very quick.
Nikki, let's speak to Michael in Heath Hayes. Hello, Michael, how are you?
All right, mate.
Yeah, good.
Hello,
Very nice, mate. Go on, Michael.
I've got a question about Margaret Thatcher, which I can't get out of my head.
Go on.
I think what I'm going to ask or say to you is right. Margaret Thatcher got rid of the unions, and to get rid of the unions, she got rid of all the workers. I mean, the amount of industry that there was in Birmingham in the 50s and 60s was unbelievable. There's nothing there now whatsoever. The whole lot's gone.
OK, Michael, a bit of exaggeration. She didn't get rid of the unions. They're still very alive and active. She didn't get rid of all the workers or indeed all the industry in the West Midlands. But I take your point. And, Nikki, self-confessed, you're someone from London, and really that was the area that you knew. One of the reasons people in this area, some of them anyway, feel sore about Margaret Thatcher and many others supported her, of course, is the devastation wrought on manufacturing, which many people think was willfully carried out by Margaret Thatcher.
And I can understand.
Do you think they've got a point when you look back at that history?
I think there's definitely an argument. I'm not an apologist for Margaret Thatcher. I'm not here to defend her, because there are many things I disagreed with. Section 28, for example. The
promotion of homosexuality in schools.
Yeah, and all of that
clause,
was. So there was many things. So I'm not an apologist or to explain. One thing that you must remember, and I think what she was very keen on, the unions had brought down the 1974 Conservative government. The unions had pretty much brought down the Labour government. So it was the unions that actually brought Margaret Thatcher into power. That cannot be denied. So it was the unions that created the Thatcherism. And what she was saying, and what she was very adequate, was that the union shouldn't be governing Britain. You elect a government. You do not elect unions to govern Britain. You elect a government. And unions had twice brought down the government of this country, and that should never happen.
Michael, thanks for your call. 08453 00 9956. Nikki Sinclaire taking your calls this morning on BBC WM. Stacey says, what a brave lady. I really admire Nikki. Wish I had her strength. I went there and knew what she's gone through. Denise says, I think Nikki's a very intelligent lady. Be yourself. UKIP are out of order, but most people could tell that without it being in the media. Let her get on with it. Let's speak to Terry in Perry Bar. Hello, Terry. How are you?
Good morning.
Yeah, hello, mate. What do you want to say to Nikki?
Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning.
I do admire you.
Thank you.
You're very courageous. You seem like a nice lady.
Thank you.
And it's wonderful that you've got so far and overcoming so many obstacles.
Yeah, I think this is one of the ththings that, people say, well, why didn't you say you were more upfront about this when you were elected? I think I wanted to show that I could achieve as an MEP. And I've the things, for example, forcing David Cameron to the dispatch box. First time in the history of this country by public petition a Prime Minister's been forced to the dispatch box. That was my campaign that did that. All the other work that I've done, I don't know if I could have achieved that much if I was having to live with this tag. And what my plea is now is, please let me get on with my work without a tag. And that's really the plea to the media.
Terry, thanks for your call. 08453 009956 if you want to ask Nikki a question. Nikki, the title of the book, Never Give Up, and there's a story very early on in it which relates to your dad, which I suppose gave you the sense, even though you and your dad disagreed on many things in life, that motto, if you like, never give up. It's an incredible story because you saw your dad getting punched over a balcony on a block of flats, and you ran over to him and you thought he was dead.
Yeah, well, he was going over this man.
What did you see?
Over a balcony. Well, I was just coming onto the green and I saw this man, in effect, throw my dad over a 20-foot balcony, and I ran to catch my dad. I was 7 years old, and I just got to maybe about 3 or 4 feet away. I suppose it's fortunate I didn't get, because I'd have been killed with that weight. And he lay in the ground, and I just thought he was dead. I looked up and the man was laughing. And then I just ran for help. And yeah, it was absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. My dad was in hospital for months and months and months.
And did you think he was dead when you first saw him?
Yeah. Yeah. And then there was a slight relief when, he said, get help, get help. And I ran and I found this man was there and he couldn't understand a word I said. And then... Yeah.
And you said in the way of things that you picked up snippets of conversation and you believed anyway that your dad would never walk again. He lived, but that you believed he would never walk again.
Exactly. He was told he would never walk again. His pelvis was totally smashed. He was a very big, muscular guy, lorry driver. So it was that probably saved him. And he had this determination that he was a driver and he wanted to drive lorries again. And he wasn't going to be told that he couldn't. So... that was, I learned a lot of the grit from my father. And also my mother, who was incredibly brave at that time. My mother was, and my grandmother, who was also very brave at that time.
You talk about your religious faith, and I mentioned that there was a time in your life when your dad wanted you to go into a traditional sort of working class trade. So you either would have been something like a lorry driver like him or a priest. And obviously, given the experiences that you've gone through in life, they, in some sense, distanced you from your family. Are you now completely reconciled?
Oh, absolutely. That was there was only a period, probably only really realistically about 6 months to a year, that was an estrangement. I mean, I've had, all this has happened 20 plus years ago, 22 years or so ago. So there's been a huge, and we've moved on. I have an incredibly close family, incredibly close. I have 13 nephews and nieces, and involved in their upbringing, helping with their homework and taking them to football matches and all that type of thing.
Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, Nikki, it's been really good to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And are we going to? Yeah, go on. We just go on. We've got time for one more. Then go on. Then Ricky in Yardley wants to have a quick word with you. Hello, Ricky. How are you?
Hi, Adrian. How you doing?
Yeah, go on. What do you want to ask Nikki, Ricky?
Just basically, I've just got one question, which is, part of the reason why people in this country don't have any faith in politicians at the moment is because what we say has no consequences. Nobody cares what the people say. Yeah. So what I was wondering was, wouldn't it be fairer if every MP in this country had say their own website or something, and when a law is about to go, when someone wants to pass a law through government, instead of the MPs deciding it, every MP asks his own constituents what they want, whether they agree with the law or not, and let the people decide. And then the MPs can vote accordingly.
I think that there is some mileage in some of the... I don't think we could do that because there's a huge amount of laws that obviously get passed. But I think on the most fundamental issues that we talk about, for example, membership of the European Union in particular, I think that there is more scope to have more referendums or more consultation with the public, which is one of the things that I've obviously... my main issue in politics is to get a referendum on the European Union. But I agree that there needs to be more... And one of the things I find with my mobile surgery, and people come up to me, they say they feel so disengaged with the professional politicians, and they're actually quite relieved to actually see someone who's willing to talk to them outside an election time.
Ricky, thanks for your call. On text, Nikki here says, I'd like to ask Nikki what can be done about under-the-table discrimination. You go for jobs and get patronised, and though one gets interviews but not taken seriously. They just tick the equality box but discriminate under the table. I am a post-op trans woman and waited 52 years to be me.
Obviously, I have sympathy with that. I just think you have to be yourself, and I think you have to be single-minded and achieve what you want to achieve. I don't think that I could have become an MEP if I was thinking about that I'm being discriminated against. I think that, I've had, I think, fortunate things, like unfortunate things in life, but also that I've turned into fortunate that I can actually think I can achieve. I actually do believe that I can achieve this referendum on the European Union. I am going to keep fighting for it because that's what I believe in it. And I'm not going to think that they're going to ignore me because I'm this or that, whatever.
No, but I suppose, our listener working perhaps in a different world to you, just working in the world of ordinary employment, acutely conscious of that discrimination, might get the interview, but then there might be a little nudge and a wink and she doesn't get through and get the job in the end.
I suppose what I would say, and it sounds, and I know it sounds, it's like never give up, keep going. Yeah, be yourself. Yeah, show why you're better for the job. Show what you've got to offer. And I would say that to anyone, not just about discrimination, it's about anything, because that's the method that I use. As the method I use as an MEP, I show that I'm better than all my colleagues in the European Parliament that represent the West Midlands. I've got a much better track record to put before the electorate than they have. And that's why I hope that people won't think about what my lifestyle is, they'll think about how I represent them.
Yeah, one texter says, UKIP would be better off without your guest. I don't believe that UKIP members would be serious about shooting immigrant children. Well, that's not quite what Nikki said. And Nikki was talking about people in the some of the
Nigel Farage seems to sit with, and why does he want to sit with those people who do that? And that's absolutely factual.
And Julia, this is the last one for now. I had a lot of comment on this, but we do need to move on. It's been a fascinating conversation. But Julia says, does Nikki agree that it is now big business and supermarkets that run this country?
Unfortunately, increasingly so, and I do probably agree with that, which is probably why we need more independent MPs and less of a party machinery.
OK, Nikki, really appreciate it. Good luck with the book Never Give Up. It is genuinely a fascinating read, and really pleasure to have you in and talk to you at such length.
Can I say juniuspress.org if they want to read the book?